Welcome to Rise Untold, where the stories behind the spotlight come alive. She was just 11 when the world lost its king of pop, but she didn't just lose a global icon. She lost her father, her protector, her safe place. Paris Jackson didn't grow up like most children. Her lullabies were stadium roars. Her childhood home had no front lawn, just flashing lights, screaming fans, and a father trying to shield his children from the world he ruled. When Michael Jackson died in 2009, the world wept. But only a few truly saw the little girl who stood on that stage, bravely speaking through tears at her father's memorial. From that moment, her silence began. Years passed. Grief didn't. It just got quieter. She grew up in a whirlwind of pressure, pain, and the haunting absence of the one man who understood her heart. She smiled in front of cameras. She posed on red carpets. She sang her songs. But behind it all was a storm. And this year, weeks after her father's death anniversary, Paris Jackson walked alone. No entourage, no makeup, no protection. Just a young woman, walking barefoot, eyes swollen, heart wide open to the world. Paparazzi caught the tears, but they missed what those tears meant. They weren't weakness. They were memory. They were love. They were the kind of grief that time doesn't erase, only teaches you how to carry. Paris didn't perform that day to chase fame. She performed because music is still the only language that makes sense when the world doesn't. She didn't choose the anniversary date. She didn't even speak about it. But she showed up. She sang. She survived another June without him. And then she cried. Quietly. Alone. Because grief doesn't need a crowd. And strength doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just walks barefoot through the noise, holding the weight of a legend in its chest, and still moves forward. Paris Jackson was never trying to be famous. She was just trying to be free. And in that solo walk, in those quiet tears, she told the world a story no headline ever could. That even in heartbreak, even in loss, even in silence, you can still rise. If she could carry that grief and still choose love, music, and life, maybe you can too. Because strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always roar. It doesn't always punch walls or stand on stages or post a perfect caption. Sometimes strength just breathes. Barely. But still. Sometimes it wakes up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, dreams echoing with voices that never got to say goodbye, and still gets out of bed. Still puts one foot in front of the other. Still dares to exist in a world that took something irreplaceable. That's the strength Paris Jackson carries. She doesn't perform it. She doesn't flaunt it. She just lives it. In the quiet. In the background. In the shadows of a last name too heavy for most to hold. Because Paris was never given a choice. She didn't ask to be famous. She didn't ask to be born into history. She didn't ask to be the daughter of the most loved and most misunderstood artist the world has ever seen. She just wanted a dad. Someone to hug her when she felt small. Someone to listen without judgment. Someone who knew who she really was, before the world had a say. And then he was gone. Suddenly. Permanently. Publicly. And she had to grieve under a spotlight, so blinding could burn anyone who dared to stand too long in it. But she didn't run. She didn't let it consume her. She just learned. She learned how to cry without making noise. How to walk past his photos in magazines without collapsing. How to answer questions with half smiles and silent prayers. How to live with the kind of grief that never really fades, only settles in deeper. Years later, the world has moved on, but she hasn't forgotten. Because daughters don't forget their fathers. Not when they sang them to sleep. Not when they protected them from the chaos. Not when they told them, "You are magic." And especially not when the world tries to rewrite their legacy. Paris has heard the criticism, the conspiracies, the documentaries, the headlines that dissect every moment of her father's life, like it was a script for public consumption. And still she loves him, openly, unapologetically, because behind the fame and the moonwalks, he was just dad. And for a little girl who's had to grow up without him, that love has become her anchor and her fire. So when she walks alone, weeks after his death anniversary, it's not just sadness. It's courage. It's protest. It's defiance in its softest form. A quiet daughter, walking through a noisy world, still loving a man the world tried to forget. And that's not weakness. That's power. That's the kind of power that doesn't trend on social media, but echoes in souls. The kind of power that doesn't scream, but heals. The kind that shows us that grief isn't meant to be buried. It's meant to be carried. Gently, honestly, and sometimes visibly. So when Paris cried that day, she wasn't falling apart. She was being real, in a world that punishes real. She was showing us that tears are not signs of defeat. They're signs you haven't given up. They're proof you still feel, still love, still remember. And maybe that's what we're all afraid of, that being strong means never breaking. But Paris shows us another way, a braver way. She breaks and still chooses to build. She aches and still creates music. She mourns and still sings. She remembers and still walks forward. And if she can do that, if she can carry that grief and still choose love, music, and life, then maybe, so can you. Maybe you can forgive the thing that haunts you. Maybe you can speak even when your voice shakes. Maybe you can cry in public and not apologize. Maybe you can tell the world who you are without asking for permission, because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the whisper behind the scream, the breath after the breakdown, the heartbeat still going after everything inside you wanted to quit. Strength is sometimes just a quiet daughter, still walking, still remembering, still hoping, still standing, still rising. She may not be trying to inspire, but she does, not with perfection, but with presence, with pain she doesn't hide, with truth she doesn't dress up. And in a world that constantly asks women to be more polished, more silent, more pleasing, she dares to be less and somehow becomes more. Paris Jackson doesn't rise in a straight line. She falls. She trembles. She disappears. But she always comes back. Different, deeper, braver. And that maybe is the kind of rise we need more of, the kind that doesn't look pretty, but feels real. So the next time you see her name, don't just remember who her father was. Remember who she is becoming. A survivor, a seeker, a woman still writing her own story. Quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. ChatGPT said, "This is not a breakdown. It's not weakness caught on camera or a moment of defeat. It's the release of years held inside, grief too sacred for words. This is not a headline. It's not drama, not noise. It's not something to scroll past or turn into gossip. This is a daughter's truth. Soft, raw, unfiltered. It's the story of someone who lost more than the world ever saw. This is a legacy reborn in whispers, not in charts or applause, but in quiet courage. And this is Rise Untold, the rise that begins in silence."